What's up, guys? Bob Gare here, and I'm going to play through a league with Eldrazi and Taxes. I don't remember if I've talked about this on the channel before, so I'll go over the deck really quickly, but I won't spend too long on it. It's a black-white deck. It needs a lot of colorless sources, so it runs Cave of Kolios as well as Ghost Quarters and Eldrazi Temple in order to do colorless sources, and Eldrazi Temple also helps to tap for Eldrazi, which there's quite a few of in Eldrazi and Taxes, obviously, given the name. So we're going to need those to cast some of our spells and abilities, and then other than that, it's mostly a black-white deck. We got black-white fast lands, because it's a pretty low to the ground deck, and Concealed Courtyard, Caves of Kolios, tap for either 2 plains, 1 swamp, and then some Shambling Events that tap for either as well. And that's basically the deck. We don't run any fetches or shocks. The shocks, I guess we could run, but they're not terribly good. It's better just go the fast lands because, like I said, we're so low to the ground. But we don't run the fetches because we have some things that turn off search, like Leonin Arbiter over here. All right, so that's kind of the mana base. Looking at the 1-drops, basically there's only 2. Path to Exile takes our opponent off creatures. A lot of times we'll have a Leonin Arbiter out. They won't be able to search the library anyway, even after the path. Aether Vial help us turbo out our creatures, and we can do a lot of neat tricks with Aether Vial. You can Flicker Wisp end of turn, for instance. It also just lets us play out our creatures pretty fast. You can like Leonin Arbiter in response to them trying to break a fetch land. So little things like that get you a long ways. 2-drop slot is where things start getting a little more serious. Leonin Arbiter works great with Path, works great with all our playset of Ghost Quarters over here. So basically, in order to search for either players is symmetric, so it's for us too. In order to search a library, you have to pay 2 mana into Leonin Arbiter. So he's a 2/2, so it's just a bear. Then Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. I only run 3 of her, and the only reason I only run 3 is because it does suck to get multiples of her, just because you can't play them all. But she is super important to the deck. A lot of people run 4 of her. 2/1 first strike for 2 is pretty powerful, and she makes all non-creature spells cost 1 more, which helps protect your team from removal heavy decks. If you're making your opponent pay a little bit more, a lot of times you can just start building up a force that they can't deal with because they have to just pay extra remover. Also, just pretty hard stop against things like Storm. And she slows down a lot of decks that run sweepers and stuff to give you that extra turn to start, hopefully finish off your opponent. I run 2 Dark Confidant. Some people don't run Dark Confidant. Can be bad in aggro matchups since you're hurting yourself a little bit. I mean, sometimes you can just use him as a 2/1 blocker in those matchups anyway for 2 mana. It's not the worst, but in a lot of matchups, he's pretty good. We don't have anything above 4 here, so, we're not taking that much damage. We do have a lot of 3-drops, so a lot of times we are paying 3 life to draw a card, but still usually pretty good for us. And then Tidehollow Sculler as a 4 of. This disrupts our opponent's hand, lets us see what's going on, lets us know how to play out our hand. Whether we hold Leonin Arbiter until they try to break a fetch that they have in hand, whether we path the thing that's on board, or whether that'll just ramp them towards the bigger thing they're going to do, or lots of stuff. Just the added information really helps us play out the game the way we want to play out the game. And then the 3-drops, 4 Eldrazi Displacer. This one's pretty neat. 3 mana to put out. A lot of times we can put it out in turn 2 with a Eldrazi Temple. And then you can pay 3 mana. 2 of it has to be colorless to blink a creature, and that creature enters the battlefield tapped when it comes back into play. So this is great at clearing out blockers, getting rid of opponent's tokens, like Lingering Souls, or if it's like black-white tokens deck. Good for a bunch of things. Thalia Heretic Thar, just as a 1 of. Our opponent's non-basic lands enter the battlefield tapped, and their creatures enter the battlefield tapped too. Again, slows our opponent down by a turn. I think as a 1 of, I like it a lot. Flicker Wisp is a 4 of, 3/1 flying. When it comes into battlefield, you can flicker something. This works really well with Aether Vial. If we flicker something on our end step, our opponent loses it for their entire turn. Sometimes we also Flicker Wisp on our opponent's end step, which can combo really well with especially Wasteland Strangler, which we're going to go over in a second, because then that card will stay exiled until the end of our next end step, so all the way through our turn. Wasteland Strangler is a 3-drop you can play. When it enters the battlefield, you may put a card from an opponent exile zone into his graveyard, and so that includes things we've exiled with Flicker with, Tidehollow Sculler, Thought-Knot Seer over here, Path to Exile. We have lots of ways of exiling things, so we basically take something from their exile and move it to their graveyard. And for doing that, we get to give a target creature -3/-3, and a lot of times in Modern, that's a kill spell. Like, you look at the things it'll kill in our deck, it'll kill a lot of those, and a lot of decks have, like, small value creatures, Dark Confidants, and things like that. So this guy can be a pretty nice 2-for-1 with stuff that we're doing already, and it turns the Flicker Wisp also into a 2-for-1 too, because we're getting, if like we do that, they're never getting that card back at the end of turn, because we'll just exile it before they can, or we'll move it to their graveyard before it ever comes back out of exile. Yep, and then the last card is a 1-of Blade Splicer, just an army in a can, especially with Flicker Wisp and Eldrazi Displacer to blink it to generate more 3/3s. So every time this comes into play, you get a 3/3, and as long as this 1/1 is in play, those 3/3s also have first strike. So pretty good. And then Thought-Knot Seer is probably the most powerful card in the deck. 4/4 for 4. One of those 4 has to be colorless. When it comes into play, it basically does the same thing as Tidehollow Sculler, except it exiles the card permanently. You basically look at their hand, exile any non-land card. When it leaves play, they do get to draw a card, but they don't get the same card back. So generally, if you just blink this repeatedly, for instance, eventually you're just going to flood them out on lands. Not that I think that's necessarily a good idea to do. I'm just saying it's not like you can take their best card and whatever they get back is a card at random. So it's not as good. It's better than Tidehollow Sculler in terms of its effect. And obviously it's also just a 4/4, which in Modern is just a really good attacker. A lot of things can't beat it. And then sideboard is a kind of mixed bag. I don't have a totally optimal sideboard, but I don't think it's too bad. Breton Forge Tender is against Burn. 1/1 protection from red. You can sacrifice it to stop the damage from a red source of your choice. 2 Pithing Needles, stop Planeswalkers, stop Fetch Lands, what does it stop Fetch Lands? Yeah, it can stop Fetch Lands, stop some artifacts, things like that. Just some matchups this is going to be good in. Like, I usually bring it in against things like Tron, where I'm like, if he plays Expedition Map turn 1, I can Pithing Needle the Expedition Map. If he plays Ugin turn 4, I can Pithing Needle the Ugin, and that gives me some small chance to get back into the game. Relic, just to fight graveyards. Pretty obvious. Tap to make the player exile a card from their graveyard. Pay 1, exile it. You draw a card, and both graveyards are exiled. We don't really use our graveyard, so we don't care about that. 2 Blessed Alliance. Good in aggroing matchups. We gain 4 life, and we can make our opponent sacrifice an attacking creature if we pay, depending on what we pay. So you can choose up to all 3 of these if you pay 6, but usually we'll be paying 2 to 4 depending on what we need to do. Can be good sideboards against Death Shadow, for instance. You can shrink their Death Shadow by giving them more life back. Maybe even make it so that your creatures trade against their Death Shadow. And it's just good against aggro. It's good against boggles. It just has a bunch of random good matchups, so that's why it's in. Stony Silence is kind of a nombo for us. Activated abilities of artifact can't be activated. That means we can't activate our Aether Vials, but in certain matchups, Affinity, maybe even Tron, we'll just go down a couple Aether Vials for these and say we'll just skip on the Aether Vial plan because it's worth it to get these Stony Silences in. Core Firewalker, almost the same as Breton Forge Tender, except it's a 2/2 pro red for 2, and whenever a player casts a red spell, you gain 1 life, but basically for the same matchup. Spellskite, not super played anymore, but it has a bunch of good matchups. Good matchups include Boggles, Burn, in my opinion. Burn's not the most important, but Boggles, Burn, Infect, Mono Green Stompy. Anything that uses a fair number of pump spells or enchantments, definitely good. And even Burn type decks, because it's a 0/4 blocker for 2, which is pretty good against those decks. And it can just, reduce the cost of any burn spell if it's just like Creatureless Burn or something. It's like every turn their 3 damage burn spell turns into a 2 damage burn spell instead. So things like that make it pretty good. 2 Mirran Crusaders. Mirran Crusader is just a 2/2 double strike, protection from black and from green. Pretty obvious when this guy's going to come in. If your opponent is a mono green deck or a black green deck or a black deck, these will come in pretty often. They're just really good 3-drops anyway. They're almost main deckable. What we have in the main deck is better in a blind matchup, but if we know we're against these colors, they're pretty much a no-brainer to put in. They stop Death Shadows in their tracks, for instance. And then Kumbal, Council of Allocation. We have pretty good matchup against Storm anyway because of the Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, but this makes the Storm matchup even more of a nightmare for them because they have to kill this guy first, because whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, they lose 2 life and we gain 2 life. So lets us win the Storm matchup pretty handily if we resolve him usually. And that's pretty much the entire deck. So I'm going to jump into some games and play it for you guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in a minute. Hey guys, Bobgar here. I just really wanted to quickly say, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you enjoy my content in general and would like to see more of it, subscribe. I'll be coming out with more content in the future. And please leave me comments and let me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, both in terms of production and in terms of my play and my deck building and all that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.